Jonathan Strange and Mr Norrell is 1,000 pages long. Is it worth it? No, it's not. Alright, see you in the next video. Bye. Okay, that's a bit harsh. It's not like I'm giving this a 2-star rating or anything. I just think that if you're going to commit to a 1,000 page book, it better be pretty darn good. And there are a lot of good things for me to say about this book. It's just that in the end, I thought it was just okay. And of course, this is just my opinion. Other people say that this is their favourite book of all time. Of all time! Okay, let me give you some context, talk about the plot, and then talk about some thoughts that I had while I was reading the book. This was Susanna Clarke's first full-length book, published in 2004. She actually wrote a bunch of short stories before this, which were published in various anthologies, and those were later collected into The Ladies of Gracedieu and Other Stories. And then there's Piranesi, that was published in 2020, and most recently she published a very slim book called The Wood at Midwinter. This book is set in the early 1800s, around the time of the Napoleonic Wars, and it's set in an alternate history where magicians have existed, and they do exist, but practical magic has been lost. All the existing magicians can't actually do any magic. They just sit around talking about the history of magic and writing essays about the theory of it. And then into this environment come two men that can actually perform magic. And without getting into spoiler territory, it then follows those two magicians and how they kind of go their separate ways and are kind of pitted against one another. Not really in terms of like a fight between two magicians, but in terms of their approaches and what they think English magic should be. And I have a bunch of notes here about what I thought as I was reading the book. First of all, the first chapter just draws you straight in. It's a very easy book to read. Susanna Clarke's prose is very, very readable. And the world building starts immediately. There are all these footnotes which kind of have all this knowledge about the alternate history, in-world kind of historical events and fictional books, and also all these little fun side stories. And one question that began to arise as I was reading it was, who is the narrator? Because they occasionally refer to themselves in the first person and even compare themselves to some of the characters that they're writing about. And apparently Susanna Clarke's other anthology stories, the short stories that she wrote, have this same sort of conceit, where the narrator of the story is some sort of in-universe character, like a publisher or someone that saw the events. Though I have to tell you, don't get excited by this, because this is only at the start of the book, and then it never gets resolved. It's kind of like an idea that she just dropped at some point. There's also a very subtle dry humour that the narrator displays, although that lessens as the book goes on. The writing style is very much like Jane Austen, kind of that 19th century, kind of long-winded. I'm not sure long-winded is the right way to describe it, but just things are said with more words than probably books now. It's that kind of old formal style, but it's more readable. Like, I have read Pride and Prejudice, and in some cases I find it a bit unreadable, whereas I never had that problem with this book. And there are some occasionally really great passages. A good example of clever writing, there's this character at one point, and he's traveling to meet a woman, and he's carrying on a conversation in his head with the woman that he's going to meet, and he's getting very vexed at how disapproving she is of him. And then he arrives, and of course she's totally lovely and doesn't say any of the things that he was thinking that she would say to him. And I think that shows a great understanding of how people think and how they spend their time worrying. And Clarke is such an inventive storyteller. She gives all these sorts of extra details and side stories. In one case, a character starts a story. They're talking to someone else, and they start this story, and they get interrupted. And then there's a footnote which goes on to tell the rest of that story, and that goes on for 4 pages. Okay, my next note is, I'm on page 190, and I'm not sure where all of this is going. Which at page 190 is sometimes okay. It's 1,000 pages. We've got a lot of ground to cover, so, you know, I'm hanging in there. It's a very soft magic system in this book. Magic seems to be employed to do some really difficult, very large things. And because it's so soft, you could say it's a bit inconsistent. There are these ridiculously kind of, I don't know whether they're complex, but they're just large things, like moving an entire city somewhere else. And the fact that they can do this kind of thing makes you wonder why they can't do some of these other simpler things. And again, I have another note. Really, her writing is incredibly inventive. Each page is just bursting with detail, little side stories and bits of history. And my next note is page 500. Still not sure where this is going. I do find it an interesting coincidence that this book came out around the same time that Neil Stephenson was writing his Baroque cycle. They're both kind of alternate histories set roughly around the same time period, weaving in these fictional characters into real historical events and real historical people. In this book you get the Duke of Wellington, you get Napoleon Bonaparte, you get Lord Byron, which is kind of interesting. And my next note is I'm at page 800 and I keep looking at other books on my bookshelves and thinking, I'd really like to be reading those, which is never a good sign. This book is taking an awfully long time to get anywhere. And then it ends. There was nothing earth-shattering that made me go, wow, that was worth it. Ultimately, I think I didn't really care all that much about the characters. There was so much promise in the first half of the book, and I feel like she just lost her mojo as the book went on. So this is one of those real mixed bags. I really enjoyed the writing style, and there was so much good world building and so much promise. But if I think of it in terms of my rating scale, where a 4-star book is a book that I want to read again, I don't want to read this book again. Maybe if it was shorter I would, but not 1,000 pages. And so therefore I can only give this 3.5 stars. I have to say I actually preferred Piranesi to this, which is a shame because I gave Piranesi 4 stars. I would have preferred that this was much better or more to my tastes. But let me know in the comments, do you wildly disagree with me? Do you agree on the points that I've made? I'd love to hear your thoughts. All right, I will see you in the next video. See you later.